I thought I was following my husband to another woman. I was wrong. What I found behind that hotel door was worse than betrayal, because it had been living inside our marriage long before that night. At 11:16 p.m., rain slid down the windshield of Claire Whitmore's car as she sat across from the Meridian Grand Hotel in Midtown Manhattan, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her fingers ached. The hotel rose above the wet street in gold and glass, the kind of place where secrets wore tailored suits and doormen smiled as if they were paid to forget faces. Claire had followed Nathan for 23 blocks from their penthouse on Park Avenue, keeping 2 cars behind his black town car, telling herself at every red light to turn around, to go home, to be the kind of wife who did not spy. But then Nathan stepped out beneath the hotel awning, and every excuse inside her went silent. He was wearing the black suit she had bought him for their anniversary dinner, the dinner he had canceled 2 hours earlier because of an emergency board call. He looked calm. Too calm. The city lights reflected on his silver cuff links as he checked his phone, glanced once over his shoulder, then did something that made Claire stop breathing. He slipped off his wedding ring and placed it in his coat pocket. For a second, the rain, the horns, the blurred yellow caps all disappeared. There was only his bare hand under the hotel lights. Then a woman appeared beside him near the revolving doors. Vanessa Hart, Nathan's communications advisor. Beautiful, polished, always dressed like she had already won the room before entering it. Claire had seen her at fundraisers, on company calls, in glossy photographs, standing one step behind Nathan with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Vanessa touched Nathan lightly on the arm and leaned in to say something. Nathan nodded, but he did not smile. That almost made it worse. This was not warm. It was practiced, hidden, familiar. Claire pulled the hood of her trench coat over her hair and stepped out into the rain before she could lose her nerve. The cold hit her face first, then the smell of wet pavement and exhaust. She crossed the street behind a couple laughing under one umbrella and slipped into the hotel lobby, just as Nathan and Vanessa entered a private elevator. The lobby was all marble floors, brass lamps, and quiet piano music, too elegant for the panic beating in her chest. Claire watched the elevator numbers rise. 12, 17, 21. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Nathan. Still in meetings. Do not wait up. Claire stared at the words until they blurred. Then she walked to the guest elevators and pressed 21. The ride up felt endless. Every floor made her doubt herself. Maybe this was business. Maybe she was humiliating herself. Maybe marriage was not broken just because a man lied about where he was. But then the doors opened onto a quiet hallway with thick carpet and soft wall lights, and she saw Vanessa's black scarf hanging from the handle of room 2114. Claire moved closer, slow enough to hear her own breathing. The door was not fully closed. A line of warm light cut across the carpet. She expected whispers. A laugh. The kind of pain a wife could name. Instead, she heard a man's trembling voice say, "We do not want more money. We want people to know what happened." Vanessa answered low and sharp. "You accepted the settlement. That means silence." Claire froze. Another voice spoke then. Nathan's. Tired. Strained. If Claire finds out the building was never safe, everything is over. The sentence struck harder than any affair could have. Claire pressed one hand to the wall, steadying herself. Building. Settlement. Silence. Not perfume. Not romance. Not the simple ugliness she had prepared herself to face. Something larger waited inside that room. Something with paperwork, money, and fear. She pushed the door open. For faces turned toward her at once. Nathan stood near the window, pale under the soft hotel lighting. Vanessa was beside a glass table covered in folders. A corporate attorney sat with a pen in his hand. Across from them were 3 ordinary people in damp coats, their faces lined with exhaustion and disbelief. On top of the nearest folder, Claire saw the words Whitmore Tower Safety Review. Nathan whispered her name like it was the last word he had wanted in that room. Claire looked at his bare left hand, then at the families, then at the files spread across the table. Her voice came out quiet but clear. "Tell me this is not what I think it is." Nathan did not answer. Vanessa stepped forward smoothly. "Claire, this is a private business matter." Claire looked at her, then back at her husband. "No," she said. A private business matter does not make a man take off his wedding ring before walking into a hotel. Nathan closed his eyes. And in that silence, Claire understood the awful truth. He had not come here to lose his marriage with another woman. He had come here to protect the lie that had been holding his entire life together. For 3 weeks before that night, Claire had been living beside a mystery that wore her husband's face. Nathan still came home to their Park Avenue penthouse, still kissed her cheek in the distracted way successful men did when their minds were already in tomorrow's meeting, still asked if she had eaten dinner without waiting long enough to hear the answer. From the outside, the Whitmores looked perfect. Magazine profiles called him a visionary real estate millionaire. Fundraisers called her graceful. Photographers loved the way they stood together under soft lights. His hand at her back, her smile steady, their life polished until no one could see the cracks beneath it. But inside the penthouse, the rooms had started to feel staged. Nathan's side of the bed stayed cold until after midnight. His phone lived face down on every table. He changed the passcode twice in 1 month, then told Claire it was company security. When she asked about the late calls, he said, "It is complicated." When she asked if they could have dinner without screens, he said, "Soon." Soon became a word with no date attached. Claire tried to be reasonable at first. She reminded herself that Nathan carried more pressure than most people could imagine. Whitmore Development had towers in New York, Boston, and Chicago. His name was on cranes, boardrooms, charity walls, and front-page interviews about safe housing and urban renewal. Men like him did not simply clock out at 6 o'clock. But marriage, Claire began to realize, could survive long hours more easily than locked doors. One Thursday morning, she found the first receipt in the inside pocket of his navy overcoat while looking for the dry cleaning tag. Meridian Grand Hotel. Room 2114. Late check-in. Private conference service. The amount was more than $700. Her first thought was not betrayal. It was confusion. Nathan had told her he was at a zoning dinner in Brooklyn that night. She stood in the laundry room with the receipt in her hand, hearing the dryer turn and turn beside her, and felt the strange humiliation of discovering proof before knowing what it proved. That evening, she placed the receipt on the kitchen island between them. Nathan looked at it for half a second too long, then said, "It was a confidential meeting." "At a hotel?" Claire asked. "At 10 o'clock at night?" "Some investors value discretion." His tone closed the conversation before it could begin. "This is not something you need to worry about." The words were ordinary, almost gentle, but they cut deeper than he knew. Claire had once taught art to third graders in Queens, children who arrived with paint on their sleeves and impossible confidence in crooked suns and purple houses. She had loved that classroom. She had loved the smell of crayons, tempera paint, and cafeteria coffee. After marrying Nathan, she left it because his world required appearances, travel, charity boards, and a wife who could remember donors' names while standing for photographs. He never asked her to quit directly. He only made it sound like support. "Just for a year," he had said. "Until things settle." Things never settled. Her old sketchbook stayed in the bottom drawer of her nightstand, filled with pencil drawings of small houses with bright windows, porches, gardens, places that felt warm because they were honest. Lately, she had started drawing doors with no handles. The second receipt came with a note folded inside it. Room 2114. Settlement meeting. No records. Claire found it in the trash beside Nathan's study, torn once but not enough. She smoothed it flat with trembling hands. Settlement. No records. Those were not the words of romance. They were the words of something hidden on purpose. Then Vanessa Hart's name appeared on Nathan's screen during dinner, again and again, until Nathan stood abruptly and took the call in the hallway. Claire watched his reflection in the dark window. His shoulders were tense. His voice was low. He said, "Not here, then." Claire cannot know. That was when suspicion stopped being a fear and became a map. Claire did not want to follow him. She wanted him to turn around, sit beside her, and tell her the truth before she had to become someone who searched pockets and memorized elevator floors. But the next night, when Nathan canceled their anniversary dinner and left in the black town car wearing the suit she had chosen for him, something inside Claire went quiet. Not calm. Quiet. She took her trench coat, picked up her keys, and followed at a distance through wet Manhattan traffic, past restaurant windows and glowing pharmacies, past couples walking arm in arm beneath umbrellas, all the way to the Meridian Grand. By the time he stepped under the hotel awning and slipped off his wedding ring, Claire had already lost the version of her marriage that depended on not looking too closely. What waited upstairs in room 2114 would not break her heart in the way she expected. It would show her that the man she married had not only been keeping secrets from her. He had been keeping her inside a life where truth was treated like a threat. Room 2114 smelled like expensive coffee, wet wool, and paper that had been handled too many times by people trying to make guilt look organized. Claire stood just inside the doorway, rainwater dripping from the hem of her trench coat onto the thick hotel carpet, while everyone in the room stared at her as if she were the one who had entered the wrong place. Nathan's face had gone pale, but he did not move toward her. That hurt more than she expected. A husband caught in a lie should have crossed the room. He should have reached for her hand, said her name, explained anything, even badly. Instead, Nathan stayed near the window with his wedding ring hidden in his coat pocket, and the city glowing behind him like a wall of witnesses. Vanessa recovered first. Of course she did. She stepped between Claire and the glass table, her smile calm, her voice wrapped in professional concern. Claire, this meeting involves confidential legal matters. You should not be here. Claire looked past her. On the table were 3 folders stamped Whitmore Tower Safety Review. Beside them sat a settlement agreement, a non-disclosure form, and a check made out for an amount that looked large enough to impress a banker and small enough to insult a life. The people across from Nathan were not investors. They were not reporters. They were a family. A man in a worn brown jacket sat with both hands folded around a paper cup. A woman beside him clutched a canvas tote bag on her lap. Another older woman held a folder against her chest, her eyes red but steady. Ordinary people, Claire thought. The kind who took the subway, packed lunches, worried about rent, and trusted buildings to be safe because someone rich had promised they were. What happened at Whitmore Tower? Claire asked. Vanessa's smile thinned. This is not your concern. The woman with the tote bag looked at Claire then, really looked at her, and something like desperation moved across her face. Are you his wife? Claire nodded slowly. Yes, Nathan said. Maria, please. The woman's name landed in the room like a warning. Maria. Not claimant. Not party. Not liability. Person. Maria stood, small but firm, her voice trembling with the effort of staying respectful. My husband and I owned a bakery 2 blocks from that building. When the safety issue shut the block down, we lost customers, deliveries, months of income. We were told it was temporary. Then we were told it was our problem. Then we were told if we accepted help, we had to stop talking. The man beside her lowered his gaze. Claire felt the floor shift beneath her without moving at all. Nathan whispered. It was more complicated than that. Claire turned on him. Then make it simple. He opened his mouth, but Vanessa spoke over him. Whitmore Development acted within legal guidelines. These families are being compensated generously to avoid unnecessary public confusion. Public confusion? Claire repeated, the words tasting bitter. The older woman stood now. My son worked maintenance near that site. He warned them the structure inspections were rushed. Nobody listened until after the shutdown. Nathan's jaw tightened. Mrs. Alvarez, that is not fully accurate. Claire looked at him, waiting. The man who could speak for 40 minutes without notes at charity dinners suddenly could not finish one honest sentence in a hotel room. Vanessa placed a hand on the folder. The agreement is fair. Everyone here has legal counsel available. Maria let out a quiet, broken laugh. Legal counsel? You mean the attorney your company recommended? Claire looked at the corporate attorney sitting near the lamp. He adjusted his glasses and said nothing. That silence told her enough. She stepped closer to the table and picked up the top page before Vanessa could stop her. Safety irregularities. Preliminary warnings. Internal review delayed. Language designed to soften the truth until it no longer looked like truth. Claire remembered the gala speeches, Nathan's interviews about building homes for American families, the glossy photos of Whitmore Tower rising against the skyline like proof of progress. She remembered standing beside him, smiling, while reporters called him a man who cared about community. How long have you known? She asked. Nathan looked at the carpet. Claire. How long? Her voice did not rise. It sharpened. Nathan finally met her eyes. 5 years. The room went silent. 5 years. Longer than their marriage. Longer than every anniversary, every charity dinner, every night he came home and kissed her forehead with secrets still on his mouth. Claire felt something inside her go cold and clear. So when I thought you were hiding another woman, she said softly, you were actually hiding them. Nathan flinched. Vanessa moved again, trying to regain control. This emotional framing is not helpful. Claire turned to her. No. That is the problem. None of you have been emotional enough. She placed the paper back on the table carefully, as if the dignity in the room belonged to the people who had least power to demand it. Then she looked at Maria, Daniel, and Mrs. Alvarez. Did anyone from Whitmore ever apologize to you without asking for silence in return? Maria's eyes filled, but she shook her head. Nathan looked wounded by the answer, as if he had expected his private payments to count as repentance. Claire saw that too, and it broke her in a quieter way. He had not been heartless. That would have been easier. He had been cowardly with good intentions, which was much harder to hate and much harder to forgive. She turned back to him. Take me home, she said. Vanessa exhaled, relieved. Claire picked up one photocopied page from the edge of the table and folded it once. Not because this is over, she added. Because I want to hear what kind of man my husband becomes when there is no hotel door left to hide behind. The ride back to Park Avenue felt longer than the 23 blocks Claire had followed him through the rain. Nathan sat beside her in the back of the town car, his black suit still perfect, his left hand resting bare on his knee where his wedding ring should have been. Neither of them spoke at first. Outside, Manhattan blurred into streaks of yellow traffic lights, dark storefronts, and umbrellas moving like shadows along the sidewalks. Claire held the folded photocopy in her lap, one thumb pressed over the words internal review delayed. She had expected a ride home from heartbreak to anger, from suspicion to proof. Instead, she felt trapped in something stranger. The quiet after discovering that the person you love has been living beside a buried truth and calling it protection. When they reached the penthouse, Nathan unlocked the door, then stepped aside as if he no longer knew whether he had the right to enter before her. The apartment was exactly as they had left it. A half-burned candle on the console table, 2 untouched place settings from the anniversary dinner they never had, her sketchbook closed beside a vase of white tulips. It looked peaceful. That made it feel dishonest. Claire walked to the dining table and placed the photocopy between the plates. Start at the beginning, she said. Nathan removed his coat slowly. For a moment she thought he might reach for a drink, for his phone, for any object that could delay the truth. He did not. He sat across from her, folded his hands, and looked at the paper like it was a sentence finally being read aloud. 5 years ago, he began, Whitmore Tower was behind schedule. My father was still chairman. Northbridge Capital was circling another deal. The city inspectors wanted additional structural review on the lower commercial levels, and our internal team flagged concerns about load distribution during renovations on the surrounding block. Claire listened without blinking. Were people in danger? Nathan swallowed. Not in the way the worst rumors made it sound, but enough that construction should have stopped earlier. Enough that local businesses should have been warned. Enough that families should have had time to prepare. And you signed the report. He closed his eyes briefly. Yes. The word was small. Too small for what it carried. My father said a delay would destroy the company. Vanessa said the language was standard. Legal said it was defensible. Everyone made it sound like a temporary adjustment, not a lie. Claire's voice stayed even. But you knew. Nathan looked at her then, and the polished millionaire was gone. What remained was a man who had spent years mistaking regret for responsibility. I knew enough to stop it. I did not. The candle flickered between them. Claire thought of Maria's bakery, Daniel's lowered eyes, Mrs. Alvarez holding her folder like proof of a grief nobody wanted to name. So the families were not exaggerating. No. And the settlements? Quiet payments at first. Then formal agreements. I thought if I paid enough, fixed Inu. Morning came without sleep. Claire stepped out of the bedroom at 6:12 m.m. Wearing jeans, a cream sweater, and the kind of calm Nathan had learned to fear more than anger. He was still at the dining table where she had left him, the city turning pale behind the windows, his wedding ring beside the photocopy like two versions of the same failed promise. He had read the safety review 3 times. He had opened old emails from 5 years ago, messages from engineers, lawyers, Vanessa, and his father, each one written in careful corporate language that made moral failure look like scheduling pressure. By dawn there was no confusion left. Only choice. Claire poured coffee but not for him. She leaned against the counter and said, "I am going to see Maria and Daniel Reyes." Nathan looked up. "Claire, I should go with you." "No," she said. Not cruelly. Clearly. They have had enough Whitmore men arrive with explanations. I am going to listen. 2 hours later, she stood outside a narrow storefront in Queens where a faded sign still read Reyes Family Bakery, though the windows were papered from the inside and the door was locked with a chain. The street smelled of rain, bus exhaust, and bread from a newer cafe across the block, a smell that felt almost unfair. Maria met her on the sidewalk wearing a brown cardigan and carrying a folder under one arm. Daniel stood beside her, quiet, protective, tired in the way people get when disappointment becomes part of their schedule. "You did not have to come," Maria said. Claire held the photocopy in both hands. "Yes, I did." They walked to a small diner on the corner, the kind with red vinyl booths, laminated menus, and a waitress who called everyone honey. Claire listened while Maria told the story without lawyers in the room. The bakery had belonged to Daniel's parents. For 22 years, it opened at 5 a.m. and closed when the last tray cooled. Birthday cakes, wedding cookies, morning rolls for construction workers, coffee for bus drivers. When Whitmore Tower's safety review slowed work and closed access to the block, customers disappeared first. Then deliveries. Then savings. Then hope. "They said it would be 2 weeks, Daniel said, looking into his coffee. "Then 6. Then nobody returned our calls unless we agreed not to speak publicly." Maria opened her folder and showed photos. The old bakery counter, Daniel's parents smiling under the sign, unpaid invoices, letters from Whitmore representatives written with sympathy and no admission. Claire felt each page like a stone added to her chest. "Nathan paid some of the rent," Maria said. Quietly. "Through a third party. I think he wanted to help." Claire looked at her. "But not enough to tell the truth." Maria nodded. "Money helped us survive. Silence made us feel erased." That sentence followed Claire back to Manhattan. Money helped us survive. Silence made us feel erased. When she returned to the penthouse, Vanessa Hart was already there. She stood near the dining table in a pale blue suit, holding a tablet, speaking to Nathan in a low, urgent voice. "If you disclose anything before the Northbridge closing, you will trigger every liability clause in the agreement. The foundation gala is tomorrow. Smile, give the housing speech, announce the sale next week, and then we can restructure privately." Nathan looked exhausted, but when he saw Claire, he did not look away. Vanessa turned, her expression cooling. "Claire, I am sorry you were pulled into something so technical." Claire placed Maria's folder on the table. "People losing their family bakery is not technical." Vanessa smiled tightly. "Emotional language will not protect anyone." "No," Claire said. "But yours has protected the wrong people for 5 years." Vanessa's eyes sharpened. "You have no idea what your husband stands to lose." Claire looked at Nathan. "I think that is the first honest thing she has said." Vanessa stepped closer to him, voice smooth again. "Nathan, listen to me. You can still fix this. Your father understood that leadership means absorbing hard decisions, so weaker people do not panic." Something changed in Nathan's face at the mention of his father. For years, Claire had watched that name tighten his spine like a command, but now he looked down at the ring on the table, then at Maria's folder, then at the sketchbook Claire had left nearby. "My father taught me how to preserve a name," Nathan said quietly. "He did not teach me how to deserve one." Vanessa blinked. "Excuse me." Nathan picked up his phone and called his general counsel. He put it on speaker. "Ellen, pause all Northbridge closing activity. Send a litigation hold to the executive team. I want an independent review of Whitmore Tower, the settlements, and every communication involving Vanessa Hart." Vanessa's face lost its polish. "Nathan, do not do this." He continued, voice steady now. "Prepare a statement for tomorrow's gala. Not the foundation speech. The truth. Claire stood very still. She had not told him what to choose. He was choosing. Vanessa set her tablet down hard enough to make the coffee cups tremble, but no one moved toward her, no one shouted, and no one gave her the drama she seemed ready to use. Nathan ended the call and looked at Claire. I am not asking you to stand beside me. Claire's throat tightened. Good. But I need to say it where they all heard the lie. She thought of Maria's folder, Daniel's lowered voice, Mrs. Alvarez holding grief against her chest, and the children who would one day draw homes with bright windows in classrooms like the one she had left behind. Then say all of it, Claire said. Not the clean version. Not the legal version. All of it. Nathan nodded. Vanessa gave a small bitter laugh. You are both going to destroy everything. Claire looked at the woman who had mistaken reputation for reality. No, she said softly. We are going to find out what is still standing when the lie is gone. The next day, the Whitmore Foundation Gala unfolded inside the Grand Meridian Ballroom with the kind of beauty that could make almost anything look clean. White orchids climbed glass pillars. Candlelight trembled across polished silverware. Donors in tailored gowns and dark suits moved between tables, smiling for photographs beneath a banner that read Safe Housing, Stronger Families. Claire stood near the back of the room in a simple black dress, her old sketchbook tucked under one arm like a piece of herself she had finally decided to bring back into public view. She had not arrived with Nathan. She had taken a cab alone, stepped through the hotel doors alone, and entered the ballroom not as a wife placed beside a powerful man, but as a witness. Across the room, Nathan stood near the stage, wearing a navy suit and the wedding ring he had put back on that morning without ceremony, without asking her to notice. But Claire noticed. She also noticed that he looked less polished than usual. His jaw was tense. His hands were empty. No prepared speech cards. No charming smile for donors. No Vanessa whispering last-minute lines at his shoulder. Vanessa was there, though, seated near the Northbridge table, dressed in white, calm enough to appear innocent to anyone who had not seen her eyes when control began slipping away. When Claire entered, Vanessa saw her and crossed the room with a practiced expression of concern. Claire, she said warmly, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. I am glad you came. I know this has been an emotional misunderstanding for you. Claire looked at her for a long second. A misunderstanding usually disappears when facts arrive. Vanessa's smile held, but only barely. Facts require context. So does silence, Claire said. The people closest to them glanced over, sensing something beneath the music. Before Vanessa could answer, the event chair stepped to the microphone and introduced Nathan Whitmore as a visionary leader committed to safe, dignified housing for American families. Applause filled the ballroom. It was generous, polished, automatic. Claire watched Nathan climb the steps to the stage, and for one painful second, she wondered if he would retreat into the version of himself the room wanted. The handsome millionaire. The builder. The donor. The man who could turn guilt into public relations. Nathan reached the podium and looked out over the crowd. His eyes found Claire first, then Maria and Daniel Reyes seated near the side aisle, then Mrs. Alvarez beside them, holding her folder with both hands. He took a breath. Thank you for being here tonight, he said. His voice carried clearly through the room. I was asked to speak about safe housing. I cannot do that honestly unless I begin with the truth my company failed to tell. The applause died strangely, unevenly, as if people were unsure whether this was still part of the program. Nathan placed both hands on the podium. 5 years ago, Whitmore Tower had safety concerns that should have been addressed earlier and disclosed more fully to the families and small businesses affected by the project. Internal warnings were delayed. Public statements were softened. Settlements were used to keep pain quiet, instead of making responsibility visible. A murmur moved through the ballroom. Vanessa stood halfway from her chair, then sat back down when Northbridge executives turned toward her. Nathan did not look at her. I signed documents I should not have signed. I told myself private payments were compassion. They were not enough. Money given in exchange for silence is not justice. It is fear dressed as help. Claire felt her throat tighten. Around her, guests stopped lifting glasses. Reporters near the media table began typing quickly. Nathan turned a page from the folder in front of him. Tonight, Whitmore Development is pausing the Northbridge transaction. An independent review will begin immediately. Every settlement connected to Whitmore Tower will be reopened under third-party supervision. A housing recovery fund will be established for the families and businesses affected, funded first by my personal assets. Vanessa Hart is no longer authorized to represent this foundation, this company, or me in any matter related to Whitmore Tower. Vanessa's face went still, stripped of its practiced softness. The legal team near the side wall moved with quiet professionalism, speaking to her in low voices, guiding her away from the donor tables without spectacle. Nathan looked toward Maria and Daniel. To the Reyes family, to Mrs. Alvarez, and to every person we made feel small so our name could remain large, I am sorry. You were not exaggerating. You were not confused. You were not obstacles to progress. You were people we harmed by choosing image over truth. Maria pressed a hand to her mouth. Daniel stared down at the table, shoulders shaking with silent relief. Claire opened her sketchbook and looked at the drawing inside. The small house with bright windows. For years, she had thought home was something two people built together in private. Now she understood that no home could survive when its foundation required other people to disappear. Nathan's final words were quieter, but the room listened harder. My wife asked me to say all of it. Not the clean version. Not the legal version. All of it. She was right. And if there is anything left of my name after tonight, I hope it is not because I protected it. I hope it is because I finally became willing to lose it for the truth. He stepped back from the podium. For several seconds no one clapped. The silence was too heavy, too honest, too unfamiliar for a room trained to reward performance. Then Mrs. Alvarez stood. She did not applaud. She simply nodded once. Maria stood beside her. Daniel followed. Only then did a few others rise slowly, not in celebration but in recognition. Claire did not move. Nathan looked at her from the stage, and she saw something new in his face. Not victory. Not forgiveness expected. Just consequence accepted. That was the first honest thing he had ever offered her in public. And as the ballroom rearranged itself around the truth, Claire closed her sketchbook, turned toward the exit, and understood that the door ahead of her was no longer a place to escape through. It was a choice she finally owned. The morning after the gala, the Whitmore name was everywhere. But for once, not in the way Nathan's public relations team had spent years arranging. News alerts lit up phones across Manhattan before sunrise. Business columns questioned the Northbridge deal. Housing advocates demanded records. Former employees began calling the independent review line. By noon, Whitmore Development's board requested that Nathan step aside as chief executive officer during the investigation, and Nathan agreed before they finished asking. There was no argument. No carefully worded resistance. No attempt to appear wounded by accountability. He signed the temporary resignation in a conference room with glass walls while reporters gathered outside the building lobby, then walked out through the front entrance instead of the private garage. Cameras flashed. Questions rose around him. Mr. Whitmore, did your company conceal safety concerns? Were the settlements designed to silence families? Is your marriage in trouble? Nathan stopped at the last question not because it deserved an answer, but because once he would have cared most about that headline. He looked toward the cameras and said only, "My wife is not responsible for my choices." Then he stepped into the waiting car alone. Claire watched that clip from a small furnished apartment on the Upper West Side. Sitting on the edge of a bed that was not hers yet already felt more honest than the penthouse. She had packed 2 suitcases before dawn. Not angrily. Not dramatically. She took jeans, sweaters, her sketchbook, her grandmother's bracelet, and the small blue mug she had used every morning before her life became a performance. Nathan had not stopped her. He had stood in the hallway, pale and quiet, and asked only, "Are you safe?" She had answered, "Yes." He had nodded as if the word hurt and relieved him at the same time. Now, in the apartment, the city hummed outside the window. It was not luxurious. The radiator clicked. The kitchen faucet dripped unless turned hard to the left. The living room smelled faintly of fresh paint. But when Claire placed her sketchbook on the little wooden table by the window, something inside her loosened. For the first time in years, no one needed her to be graceful for the camera. Her phone buzzed with messages. Reporters, society acquaintances. Board members' wives who had ignored her for years, and now wanted to say they always knew she was strong. She answered none of them. Near evening, Maria Reyes called. Claire almost let it go to voicemail, then picked up. "I just wanted to say thank you," Maria said. Her voice was tired but steadier than before. "Not because everything is fixed. It is not. But today, someone from the review office called us and asked for our full story without pushing a settlement form across the table." Claire closed her eyes. "I am glad. Are you all right?" The question surprised her. People kept asking about Nathan, the company, the scandal. Few asked about her. Claire looked around the apartment, at the unopened boxes, the sketchbook, the rain beginning again against the glass. "I am learning to be." That night Nathan came by. He did not call from the lobby demanding to be let up. He texted once. "I have the first review documents and the fund structure. I can leave them with the doorman if you do not want to see me." Claire stared at the message for a long time before answering. "You can come up for 10 minutes. When he entered, he looked different without the armor of his office. No tie, no driver waiting with the engine running. Just a man holding a plain folder in both hands. He stood near the door, careful not to move deeper into a space she had not invited him to share. "Northbridge withdrew," he said. "The board accepted my leave. The recovery fund will be managed by an outside housing nonprofit. My personal assets are being transferred first." He placed the folder on the small table. "Maria and Daniel are on the priority list. Mrs. Alvarez too. Everyone affected will be contacted again without non-disclosure terms." Claire opened the folder, scanning the pages. This time the language was clearer, less polished, less afraid of responsibility. "This is a start," she said. Nathan nodded. "I know." Silence settled between them, not hostile but careful. He looked at the sketchbook on the table. "Are you drawing again?" Claire's hand rested over the cover. "I am trying." "Good," he said softly. "I am glad." He turned to leave, but she stopped him with one sentence. "You understand I did not leave because I stopped loving you." Nathan's shoulders tightened. He looked back slowly. Claire's voice stayed calm though her eyes burned. "I left because I did love you, and I could not keep living in a home where love was used to excuse lies." Nathan absorbed that without defending himself. "I understand." "No," she said, not unkindly. "You are beginning to." A faint, painful smile touched his face, gone almost immediately. "That seems fair." At the door he paused. "Claire, for what it is worth, you did not misunderstand me at the hotel. You saw me clearly. I am sorry it took that for me to see myself." Then he left, closing the door quietly behind him. Claire stood in the silence of the small apartment, listening to his footsteps fade down the hall. On the table lay the folder, the sketchbook, and a future that no longer knew how to pretend. She picked up a pencil and opened to a blank page. For the first time in months, she did not draw a door without a handle. She drew a window, small and square, with light coming through. 6 months changed the shape of everything, but not all at once. It happened in ordinary pieces, the kind no camera waited to capture. Claire found a storefront classroom in Queens 2 blocks from where the Reyes family bakery used to stand, with wide front windows, scuffed wood floors, and walls that smelled faintly of old paint and new possibility. She called it Bright Window Studio, not because it sounded impressive, but because the first drawing she made after leaving Nathan had been a window with light coming through. On Tuesday afternoons, children painted crooked houses, parents filled out housing assistance forms at a folding table near the back, and Maria Reyes brought trays of cinnamon rolls from the new commercial kitchen she and Daniel were slowly rebuilding with help from the recovery fund. Claire did not pretend the money fixed everything. It did not return lost years, lost customers, or the feeling of being believed the first time. But it turned apology into rent checks, reopened storefronts, corrected public records, and allowed people who had been reduced to settlement numbers to stand in daylight with their names restored. Nathan came to the studio every Friday at 4 p.m. Never early enough to seem eager for praise, never late enough to make anyone wait. At first, he stayed near the door with boxes of supplies in his arms, uncertain where to place himself. The children knew him only as Mr. Nathan, the tall man who carried canvases, cleaned brushes, and always wore shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms even when he clearly did not understand how glitter worked. Claire watched him from across the room, careful not to confuse effort with repair, but also careful not to deny what was changing. He no longer spoke in speeches. He asked questions and stayed for the answers. When Daniel explained what the bakery needed to meet city code, Nathan did not say, "I will handle it." He said, "Can I connect you with someone and would that help?" When Mrs. Alvarez brought in old maintenance notes for the public record, he sat beside her for 2 hours, sorting dates, listening as if every page mattered because now he knew it did. Vanessa's name disappeared from the company directory, then from the news cycle, then from the conversations that mattered. The independent review confirmed misconduct in the settlement process, Whitmore Development paid fines, several executives resigned, and Nathan remained away from the chief executive role longer than anyone expected. Reporters called it a fall from power. Claire, who had once watched power make him unreachable, privately wondered if it was the first honest ground he had ever stood on. One Friday in late autumn, she arrived at the studio after lunch and found Nathan alone near the back wall, holding her old sketchbook open to the drawing of the small house with bright windows. For a moment she felt exposed, as if he had found a diary entry written in pencil. "I am sorry," he said, closing it gently. "Maria said you wanted this framed." Claire nodded. "For the classroom wall." He looked at the drawing, then at the empty nail waiting above the shelves. "May I?" She handed him the frame. There was no music, no applause, no polished ballroom light. Just a quiet room, the smell of tempera paint, traffic outside, and Nathan standing on a small step stool trying to hang a picture straight. The first attempt tilted left. Claire said, "A little higher on your side." He adjusted it. "My side has historically been the problem." She tried not to smile and failed. The smile was small, but it changed the air. Nathan saw it, and for once did not try to turn it into permission. He simply stepped down and looked at the framed drawing. "It belongs here," he said. Claire stood beside him. In the glass, their reflections appeared faintly over the pencil lines. Not the glamorous couple from foundation photos, not the husband and wife divided by a hotel door, but two people standing in a room built for second chances that still required work. Nathan reached into his coat and took out a folder, plain and unbranded. "The final fund report," he said. "Every original settlement reopened. No silence clauses. Public correction statements issued. Maria and Daniel's bakery grant completed. Mrs. Alvarez's family records amended. There is more work ahead, but this part is done." Claire accepted the folder. The pages were heavy, not with secrets this time, but with names, signatures, and completed promises. "Why bring it to me?" she asked. Nathan looked at the drawing on the wall. "Because you were the first person who made me understand that a home is not what you build over the truth. It is what is still standing after the truth is finally spoken." Claire held the folder against her chest, feeling the echo of the night she had carried a different kind of proof through a hotel hallway. This time no door was closed. No ring was hidden. No one asked her to smile for a lie. Nathan did not ask to come back. He did not ask what they were. He only looked at the window in the drawing, then at the real afternoon light filling the studio and said, "I can leave this with you." Claire looked at him for a long moment, then at the children's paintings drying along the wall. Purple roofs, yellow suns, families drawn as stick figures with enormous hands. "Stay," she said quietly. "Class starts in 20 minutes, and somebody has to wash the brushes." Nathan's face softened, not with triumph, but with gratitude careful enough not to break the moment. He rolled up his sleeves. Claire set the folder on her desk and opened the supply cabinet. Outside, Queens moved on loudly and honestly. Inside, beneath the framed sketch of a house with bright windows, they began again in the smallest possible way. Not as a perfect couple, not as a finished story, but as two people finally willing to do the work where everyone could see. Winter came softly to Queens that year, dusting the sidewalks outside Bright Window Studio with thin morning snow and turning every breath into a small white cloud. Claire arrived early on the last Saturday before Christmas, carrying 2 grocery bags filled with paper cups, cookies, ribbon, and the kind of cheap glitter that somehow survived every cleaning attempt. The studio lights flickered on one by one, warming the scuffed wood floors, the paint-splattered tables, and the framed sketch on the back wall. A small house with bright windows, no longer hidden in a drawer, no longer waiting for a life honest enough to hold it. By 10 o'clock, the room was full. Children painted ornaments. Parents talked over coffee. Maria and Daniel Reyes stood behind a folding table with trays from their reopened bakery, their new sign photographed and pinned proudly to the community board. Mrs. Alvarez helped a little boy choose between green and blue paint while pretending not to smile when he used both. Nathan arrived last, shaking snow from his coat, carrying a stack of donated canvases and a box of bakery napkins he had forgotten he was holding because Daniel had handed him too many things at once. He looked nothing like the man Claire had followed to the Meridian Grand. No guarded phone. No private elevator. No invisible wall between his image and his conscience. He wore a simple wool coat, dark jeans, and the wedding ring still on his hand, not as proof that he had been forgiven, but as a reminder that promises only mattered when they could survive daylight. Claire watched him crouch beside a table to help a child uncap a stubborn marker, and something in her chest ached, not from pain this time, but from the fragile tenderness of seeing someone change without asking the room to applaud. Later, when the children hung their drawings along the windows, Nathan found Claire near the supply shelves, tying ribbon around extra paintbrushes. "There is something I want to show you," he said. He did not sound dramatic. That was how she knew it mattered. He handed her a slim folder. Inside was a deed for the Bright Window Studio building, transferred into a non-profit trust managed by Claire, Maria, Mrs. Alvarez, and 2 community board members. No Whitmore branding. No naming rights. No speeches. Just ownership protected from becoming another man's monument. Claire read the first page, then the second, her eyes slowing over every line. "You bought the building?" Nathan shook his head. "The trust did. I funded it. You control it. The community keeps it." She looked up at him. "Why did you not tell me?" His answer came quietly. "Because I wanted to finish something good before I talked about it." The old Nathan would have announced it beneath chandeliers. The old Nathan would have turned generosity into a photograph. This Nathan stood beside a shelf of washable paints, letting the gift be practical, quiet, and complete. Claire closed the folder against her chest. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Around them, the studio hummed with life. Paper rustling, kids laughing, Maria calling for more napkins, Daniel explaining that cinnamon rolls counted as breakfast if eaten before noon. "I am not the man you married," Nathan said. Claire looked at him carefully. No, his face tightened, accepting the word. Then she added, "But maybe you are becoming the man you should have been honest enough to become." His eyes softened. He nodded once, as if the sentence was more than he deserved but exactly what he needed to keep earning. When the open house ended and the last family stepped into the snowy afternoon, Claire stayed behind to turn off lights. Nathan swept glitter into a dustpan with the seriousness of someone handling evidence. She laughed then, fully, unexpectedly, and the sound filled the room with a warmth no radiator could have made. He looked up, smiling, and for the first time, the silence between them did not ask for forgiveness. It simply allowed peace. Claire walked to the framed sketch and adjusted it by a fraction of an inch. "Still crooked," Nathan said gently. "A little," she said. "But it is ours to straighten." He stood beside her, close but not assuming, waiting as he had learned to wait. Claire slipped her hand into her coat pocket and took out his wedding ring from the night at the penthouse, the one she had kept after placing it beside the report. Nathan looked stunned. "I thought you left it there." "I thought about it," she said. "Then I realized the ring was never the lie. The silence was." She held it out to him. "I am not giving you back the old marriage." Nathan took a careful breath. "I know. I am offering a new one. Slower. Honest. With doors that stay open." His hand trembled slightly as she placed the ring in his palm. He did not put it on right away. Instead, he looked at her as if asking permission for every step from here forward. Claire nodded. Only then did he slide it beside the ring he already wore. A second circle, not elegant, not traditional, but deeply true. One for the promise they had broken, one for the truth they chose after. Outside, snow softened the street. Inside, the bright windows reflected 2 people standing in a room built from confession, consequence, and careful hope. Claire took Nathan's hand, not because everything was healed, but because healing had finally become honest work they both knew how to do. She looked at the framed house on the wall, then at the real room around her, filled with paint, community, and light. A home is not something you build over the truth, she said. It is what grows when nobody has to disappear for love to survive. Nathan squeezed her hand once, quietly, gratefully. And for the first time the life ahead of them did not look perfect. It looked real. That was better.